I have all of my reds pressed and ready to cut. I have them in color order here just to help me stay organized. They are going from darkest to lightest on the pattern that is red number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Yes, 6 is much pinker than it is a red, but because these are hand dyes and not manufactured solids or prints, they don't have specific names. I wish I were creative enough and had enough time to sit and name every single color something wonderful and cute and creative, but I don't, so that's what we are calling them for the pattern. I am going to cut them according to the instructions. So in your pattern, you will see listed what each color gets cut to. For the most part, they will be cut in 2.5-inch strips, but do take note on which colors are and are not. For example, red number 4 is actually a 1.5-inch strip, and red number 5 is only one 2.5-inch square. So just keep note of those little differences. You can stack and cut multiple fabrics at a time, which is what I'm going to do. So I will go ahead and get these cut up, and as I'm cutting, I will share little tips and tricks as they come up. So we'll get started with each one. It does indicate what they are being cut for, so just keep an eye on your instructions, check mark as you go, and we'll be ready to piece in no time. I am going to start here with well, since it's on top, I'm going to start with my lightest one. So this one is number 5, and that one gets just one square. So you'll have a lot left over to do some wonderful projects with. And number 4 gets 1.5-inch strips. Now please just be aware on number 4, and I will show you when we get there. It is that one that is just 1.5-inch strip. So I know I just said it, but just in case, saying it again. And then number 3, 2, and 1 are also 2.5-inch strips. So we're going to remove these out of my stack. And we'll get to cutting these. Actually, what I think I might do is cut them individually and do it in half. Again, that is for video purposes. It's really hard for me to cut a huge length because my camera's here. At home, you can stack them and do 2 colors at a time. Just like on the white, I'm going to true up this edge. Again, my left-handed friends, start from this side and true up this edge, and then start cutting your strip. We only need 1 strip of this one. I will align, so just like the white, just exactly the same. I'm going to align the fold, which is down here. Let me see if I pull this up, maybe you can see just a little bit better. I'm going to align the fold right down here, right through those mid-range measurements. I'm using the 1/2-inch mark actually, and make sure I don't have any piece under here tucked back, and then true up that edge. Flip this over. Now, let me go back here. Why am I flipping it over? So let's talk about that for a second. When you're saying, well, Christy, what if you just aligned your fabric like so on one of your measurements here, and then count backwards 2.5 inches and then cut there? Why not do that? Well, I don't trust myself that much. I don't trust myself. Now, I do trust myself that I can align my ruler to my mat. What I don't trust is that this won't shift at all. So I feel like I get a much better cut, much more accurate when I flip it over. Give it a try this way. See if your cuts come back more accurate if you are used to doing it the other way. So I line it up over here. This way my ruler is keeping the fabric from shifting, and it's not going to go anywhere unless I shift. And then it's my own fault. So again, I align it here at the bottom, just through the lines. You can use the 1/4-inch line. Oh, that's kind of nice actually. And your trued up edge. And then go ahead and give it a cut. You only need one, so the rest is for your stash. So go ahead and get that folded and out of your way. Okay. Now this specific one is red number 6, and it is getting cut into those half square triangles. You need 8 of them, just like with the white that we did previously. So I'm putting the raw edges over onto my left, getting my Fons and Porter ruler, aligning at that number 2 in the circle along the bottom, and then that little corner will stick off the top. And this is that little bit of an awkward cut where you have to do 2 sides. So again, pardon my arm. All right, so we've got 2. Now you just have to flip the ruler around. It's much easier for just that one single cut. One thing, I do wish this ruler had those grippies, but that's okay. 4. 6. And final cut. Now these rulers are also great for doing churn dashes, all sorts of different quilt blocks. So now I've got those 8 there. Have a little bit of scrap left over you can put off to the side. And we'll go ahead and keep going down the list and checking it off as we go. So next up is red number 3. So this would be the medium, the red. Again, it is also a 2.5 inch strip. This one is also cut for half square triangle units, which is going to be the sky for flying geese. I like using this ruler, the Fons and Porter, because it can still be used for the flying geese when you combine the quarter square triangle unit and the half square triangle units. It makes the flying geese. So we'll get this aligned and trued up. This is red number 2. Red number 2 gets a 2.5 inch strip as well, but it gets cut on the quarter square triangle side for the geese portion of the flying geese. So there's 2 and 4. Right, and then number 1, same half square triangle units as we've done before. Okay, we are at red number 5, and this one gets that little, just the simple little 2.5 inch square. Just using your regular old ruler, just cut one little 2.5 inch square. And don't worry, you are going to be using up this fabric. You're going to love it so much. And some of these colors are going to be used in blocks for future months and accent blocks as well. Okay, we have our little 2.5 inch square. And last but not least, those 1.5 inch strips. So again, just for camera purposes, I'm going to fold this in half. I generally like to cut skinnier strips unfolded so I don't get any distortion, but we'll hope for the best here. Okay, so this is the red number 4. Again, it looks a lot brighter on the camera than it is, but that's quite all right. We're going to true up this edge. Now, let's back up a step. The instructions say length of fabric. So the length of the fabric is parallel to the selvage. So that is where you have the least amount of stretch. This is a skinny strip, and I want to really take advantage of that lack of stretch in the length grain and make my skinny strips long and skinny along that length so they don't stretch and distort as much as they would if I cut it against the width. And with this being just a 1.5 inch strip, it really will make a big difference if you try it. Go ahead and try it this way. So just like we did before, we're truing up the edge, but this again is the length, so it is parallel to the selvage. Truing it up and flipping over. The wind caught my little blocks. And the 1.5 inch, I'm going to align it here and be really careful that I don't get distortion at that fold, because if you've ever cut long skinny strips for bindings or borders and you found that your strip goes at a V rather than a straight line, because you have cut at the fold, it's just because you didn't get that fold nice and straight. For these pieces, it will probably not matter too much because we're cutting pieces out of the strip. Okay, so we are going to cut 2 different strips, and 2 4.5 inch strips and 2 2.5 inch strips. So I'll true up this one edge here, and I may so let's do the 4.5 first. And again, I'm lining up that longer edge at that 1/4 inch mark just to help me keep it straight. It's a better visual for me. So there's 2 of the 4.5, and now we're going to do 2 of the 2.5. Alright, and we have a little scrap left, and we are set. We have everything cut out for this entire block. So let's run through it. Everything, just so you are confident we have everything ready. So we've got our 8 2.5 inch squares. We have our 8 2.5 inch half square triangle units. We have our, remember way back when I was cutting the white ones and I ended up having to use those scraps? And I'll make a note of this in the video at the time, but I made 8 and not 4. So you've got some extras if you followed along with me, but I'll put a little note in that video just to be sure. So we only need 4. We'll use these later though. I promise we will use these later. So we've got those, and then we have red number 1. We've got 8 of the half square triangle units. And red number 2, we've got 4 of the 1/4 square triangle units for flying geese. And then from red number 3, we have 8 of the half square triangle units. And then from red number 4, we have those strips right here. From red number 5, we have our little square. And finally, from red number 6, we have our half square triangle units, 8 of those. So this is what your cuts should all be like. Let's go ahead and lay them out and see what our block looks like. Before I start piecing any block, usually, I really like to lay out my pieces just to make sure I really like how the colors look, especially with these hand dyes. Sometimes there are variations within one piece of fabric, and you might have a darker piece versus a lighter piece that you don't really particularly care for. That can also happen with prints. If you cut out a certain portion of a print that the scale isn't quite right, you might want to cut another piece as well. So we have the center, which is that 2.5-inch square. And then we have our 2 little side pieces. Now, it's even more dramatic on the camera, but this piece is a lot lighter than this piece. I'm not sure I'm really thrilled with that, so I might use that little scrap I had and cut. Yes, so I had this little scrap left over, and I'm going to cut a new one of those. So let's go ahead and do that. Again, it's just a 2.5 by 1.5, and then I think I'll be much happier with the color placement there. Let's see, what do you think? Oh yeah, this one's just way too light. I want to have more of a contrast there. So perfect. So that worked out really well. So these get laid together there. And then these bands go across the top. And of course, they don't match because, well, we haven't sewn them, so we haven't absorbed that seam allowance yet. Next are our first set of flying geese, which use the pink number, let's see, 2 and 3. So 2 and 3. So these little guys here are going to be your number 3 reds. And they are going to be here like this. And then the number 2 red, which is getting darker, goes into there like that. So these will go here. And again, we haven't absorbed the seam allowance. And then this one gets set into here. All right, so this is the block laid out, unpieced of course, and I think it looks pretty great. I'm really happy with how the color placement is looking. I do want to say again, I've said it several times, that the reds are a lot brighter on the video than they are on the in person. So they look a little bit hotter. They're a little more subdued in person, so don't worry too much about that. And the next thing we're going to do is start piecing these units together, and I will walk you through that next. My piecing strategy for this block is going to be making the half square triangle units and flying geese units first, of course, and piecing the center. And then once we get all those little units sewn together, then it will be sewn together in rows. So we'll have a row here, this entire section is a row, another row here, and another row here. We'll press the seams to the side. I'll show you how I do that so that they nest, and we will spin them to alleviate bulk. And then the whole piece will be finished. You'll have a gorgeous, wonderful, fabulous block. at the end, I think you're going to just love how this turns out, and you'll be so proud of the new skills that you have learned that you can take with you to sew and quilt on any project. So what I'm going to do next is group all of my units together, and then I'm going to show you how I glue baste them to get them ready for sewing. Okay, everything's grouped together so that I am ready to sew each portion as units. I'm going to start with the center. Here it is the start of what the traditional block White House steps. Some people also refer to it as courthouse steps, and it is a variation of a log cabin. So it starts with a center square, and then you add 2 squares to each side, parallel each other or opposite each other, and then you add another strip to each of those sides. Now if you kept on going and you add another strip here and here and there, you could keep going and going and going with this block, and it makes some really beautiful designs, secondary designs, depending on how you color them. For this, it's just our center, so we're just going to make it this cute little small unit. So to set up for glue basting, I just need a couple of things. I need my washable Elmer school glue with the microfine glue tip. These we make and sell. They're available in my store. The Elmers you can also get in my store, but you can get at Walmart, Target, any local place. I do find that the bigger stores, Walmart, Target, do sell it for less expensive if you can find it. Office supply stores and art supply stores tend to charge more. Okay, so we've got that. And I've got my little iron. I love this little guy. It's a steam fast for doing small work. Glue basting, applique. It's nice and light. It gets really, really hot, which is hard to find in a small iron. And the handle isn't on a hinge. I have a couple other brands that have handles on hinges, and I keep breaking them. So I'm hoping that this will last me longer than those do. I like a smaller iron for this work. It's just a little bit more convenient. These irons I also sell in my shop, but if you find them locally, I think it's wonderful when we can support our local stores too. So let me get my pressing board and we'll get going. First thing I'm going to do is glue baste these pieces onto here. Now these won't get glue basted until these 2 edges are sewn. The thing that I love about glue basting is you can prep multiple pieces, multiple edges at the same time. If I were going to pin these, and if I were to pin one side and then pin the other, I'd have pins all over the place and I inevitably would poke myself. But with this specific size, you can't do it with every size, but with this one I can glue baste both edges and sew them, and then it's ready to go. Alright, so just a little bit of glue on the inside edge of the seam allowance. That shows it really well. It's about the 1/8 inch line. If you are working with prints, make sure you put right sides together, and then that gets heat set. Doesn't take much, just a couple seconds. This glue will wash out. It does not gum up your needle, and we are putting it so close to the edge, the likelihood of you sewing through it is very slim. So see how I have both edges heat set there, and now they are both prepped and ready to sew. Well, it's time to get sewing. I have my machine set up with the red thread. It is the Surfine 2499 that comes in the thread set. If you'd like, you can color match with a different red or use a neutral if you prefer. I am using the Schmetz machine embroidery needles. I'm using the 7511. I really like this size with most 50 weight threads to 60 weight, and the reason I like these needles, I'll run through my 3 reasons real quick. They are ballpoint, so they are going to spread the fibers across or open and then land the stitch without splicing and causing holes in your piece. I also use them for all of my machine quilting. They're also polished. The eye is polished, I mean, so you get a little bit less linting as the needle and thread work together. And they are heat tempered, so they really stand up to any sort of deflection, change in movements, really, really well, especially, you know, when that needle is going down into the bobbin mechanism. If there's ever a little deflection in there, it recovers from it really well. So these are my favorite. You can get them at most fabric stores, quilt shops. I do carry them in my store as well. So let's go ahead and start piecing this little center. I have both of those sides glue basted and heat set. I'm going to sew this with a scant 1/4 inch. That is going to be my consistent seam allowance throughout everything that I'm going to piece. Whatever your seam allowance choice is, whether it's scant, full 1/4 inch, so just staying consistent, whatever your seam allowance is that you choose to do, that consistency will allow your blocks to match up really well when you start piecing everything together. So I'm going to go ahead and just start from the top to the bottom. Back stitching is not necessary on this because I am going to be adding on that other piece on the top and bottom. So trim that off and do the other side. See, isn't that nice how that's glue basted and we can just go from one side to the other. Right, so I've gotten this sewn. I'm going to go ahead and press it, and then we'll get the other side sewn on. Well, let's go ahead and get this pressed and ready to sew on those top pieces. I'm going to just press these right out like this, out to the sides. And then these should match up pretty. Oh my goodness gracious, they don't. Well, I made an oops. All right, so let's look at what I did. And darn, if nobody caught me when I was cutting these earlier, you probably are all watching the previous video saying, man, she's cutting those too big, she's cutting those too big. But that's okay. I put a note in the video, so when you're watching, you probably saw that I made a mistake, but corrected at least in text at the video. So these strips are supposed to be 1.5 inches. I cut them 1 3/4. Like I mentioned before, it's always better to cut things too big and have to trim than have it be too small and not have enough fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and trim these up, and magically we'll have these all the right size and I'll get them put back together correctly. All right, I am all fixed up and ready to go now. Since I had cut these too big, I just cut off a 1/4 inch off of each of the long edges, and now they are going to fit just like they should. And you know, we all do those silly little things, but it is nice when it can actually be fixed pretty easily. So I am going to glue baste both of these onto each edge, go and sew them on my machine just like I did the center ones, and then press out. There's no need to backstitch here. Feel free if you'd like to, but we are going to add pieces to the edges and that will reinforce the seams. So let me go ahead and glue baste those on so you can see that again. Got a little plug. I forgot to put it in my cup upside down. All right, if you ever get a little plug in your glue, so if you ever get a little plug in your glue tip, like I have right now, best thing to do here is do not push the plug in, because then that little ball of glue will end up inside and it'll end up trying to come back out and will cause another plug. So what I do is give my bottle a really hard squeeze, take a straight pin, and right at the tip here while I'm squeezing, I grab the little plug and look at that. It all comes. That was a really good example. And the little plug's on the needle or on the pin, and then the glue comes out and releases itself. So let me wipe all that off on a little scrap. And now it's ready to go. And then I don't have to worry about that little ball of goo coming back out again. Okay, put that in upside down. Meaning my glue into that little cup I showed you earlier. And put both of these on centered and at the edges. Heat set them. And then they're ready to sew. So when you see this again, I'm going to go poof, and it'll be all sewn